Hello, Xers and interwebers, and welcome to Naive in the 90s, the podcast. I'm your host, Emily. I was a 70s baby, an 80s kid, and a 90s troublemaker. On today's show, we're going to explore some nostalgic items and talk about how awesome growing up in the 80s and 90s was. So, let's just get into it. Today, I want to go through some things that are considered super prominent to the 80s and 90s experience and growing up in those times. Basically, I'm just going to get nostalgic about some random things and share my views and experiences. It should be fun. I mean, at least for me. So we'll see what happens. So it's really cool because anyone who was a kid in the 80s and even in the 90s, we grew up in a really, really interesting time because it was like pre-internet and pre-cell phones. Yes, there were beepers and yes, there were the giant like Zach Morris cell phones, but nobody had those cell phones. And beepers, they were cool. Not everyone had them, first of all. They weren't really prominent for kids especially to have until like the early mid 90s. And yeah, you could only do so much with them. It was like there's a phone number to call. You wouldn't even know who it was unless you had some kind of code with your friends, which a lot of us did. Or if there were fancy people that got voicemail with their beepers, which I guess is cool. I do know one of my friends, Sarah, in the book, she and I would like text before there was texting. And it would be like the T9 texting, which if you remember when texting came out, that was when you had to like go through each number. Like 2 had A, B, C, D, and like, 3 had E, F, G, or whatever it was. So it would be like T9 where you used each number had like 3 letters assigned to it, and you would like scroll through using like that number to get to the letter. Well, we didn't have the actual letters, we only had the numbers, but we knew that those letters were corresponding with those numbers because for some reason, and I don't actually know why, probably like the old fashioned phone numbers that were like KPL 5 New York or whatever. Maybe that's why the letters are on there. I don't know. But there've always been letters on our phones, even when they were rotary. So we would just send coded messages through texting, like simple messages, and then we'd have to decode them on the other end. And I don't know, I thought that was pretty cool. It's pretty ingenious. But yeah, so, we grew up pre internet and pre cell phone, and that meant a lot of different things. Pre cell phone, that meant we were just out and about. Once we left the house, we were just kind of out, unless we were at a specific place where we told our parents or whomever that we were going to be at like Sally Jane's house and that they had the number. And phone numbers were, we would have them on lists and written down if you were going somewhere, or like if your parents went somewhere when you were little, they'd give the babysitter the phone number of the restaurant that they were going to be at. Like it was so different. And you would just hope that you would catch whomever at these places. And so that changed how we got together. There really was, not a lot of super planning, kind of, but also there was planning. Like, we would all have to be like, well, we're gonna meet at so and so's house or at, place XYZ at this time. Or, which would happen a lot, is we would just congregate somewhere by chance. Like, we knew, oh, well, neighbors A and neighbors B are going to be down at the schoolyard playing kickball, so I'm gonna go down there too. And that's just kind of how it was, because cell phones just, they add so much convenience to planning and to like getting places and like letting people know you're late, which is a thing, we didn't really have. Like, if you were somewhere waiting for someone and they were gonna be late, you just kind of waited and wondered. Yeah, so pre-internet, that brings in the whole thing about like information, right? And like all the information. Back then, we would have like libraries and encyclopedias and, even information you could call a number and ask a question. I don't remember what it was called exactly, but there was a specific number that you could call and you could ask them anything and they would look up the information in their own like library or fancy olden day computer or something. I don't know. And then they would either tell you then or they would call you back with the answers. So, like, that was crazy. Also, pre-internet, that meant that like magazines and like mail, just mail in general, was a big deal. That's where we would join fan clubs, get magazines from all types of places and about all sorts of subjects, like flyers about stuff, clubs, like sticker clubs, and like just I don't even know. Mail was amazing and it was so special, and it's weird that it's not. Like, even the newspaper was big. Like, it had everything in it. You looked up movie times. You looked at real estate. You found out who got arrested and all the things that were happening. Who was getting married? Who had a baby? And now, like, that information is just on the internet in a plethora of different ways and avenues, and it's cool, and also it's weird. Like, I don't know. It's I'm glad that I experienced things the way I did, like calling the movie theater and listening to the robo man tell us the times and what was playing, or looking it up in the newspaper and deciding what show we were going to go to. Like, I don't know, it was cool. Personal ads were hilarious too, like, uh, want ads, um, job ads, like, there were just everything in the paper. Like, anything that you have on the internet almost, you would find in the paper. Like, almost. Not everything, but I don't know. There were definitely weird weird papers too. So, yeah. So growing up in that era, it was very different and it was pretty cool. Another thing that was really different, and I feel like Gen X or the early millennials, or I guess they're calling themselves geriatric millennials, or some people say zennials or exennials. I don't know. There's a whole bunch of debate and back and forth on the internet about all of it. But the people who grew up in the 80s and the 90s, we grew up in a really interesting time where we kind of had a crossover with a lot of things, like I just talked about, the pre-internet, the pre-cell phone thing, but also video games, which is huge. Arcades were gigantic. And I'm not saying that there weren't games before Gen X, because like pinball was huge back then, and like boomers like love their pinball. However, I do think that our video games in arcades were different. We had way more advanced, I guess, like King's Quest, or is that what is Dragon's Quest? I can't. It was like a cartoon. It was like literally like playing a cartoon. And then, Frogger and Pac-Man and Invaders and all that kind of stuff. It was super fun to go to the arcade and just play all that. However, We also grew up with home video games. But our home video games were like we started with Pong, which, as fun as it was, is not that advanced. And then Atari, which was freaking amazing. Like Burger Time, Pitfall, just Frogger at home, Pac Man at home, like things that were in the arcade were now at your house. It's just awesome. It was awesome. And then not long after, like in the 80s, Nintendo came out, and that was just a whole game changer. And from there, video games kind of changed, right? Like they weren't exclusive to arcades. And instead of meeting in these places to play these games, we started playing them at home. And now most of the video gaming is done at home, and it's done not only with the people in your house, but anywhere. Like you can play with anyone at any time and anything, and the graphics are amazing. So it's just an interesting place to be because, like we got to experience the simpler stuff, but we also got to experience the more advanced things. And I just think that that gives us an interesting and different perspective. When we think about the technology of, like that we have now, if you go to something like IMAX and it's just surrounding, and then there's like 3D, and there's I don't even know what it's actually called, but there's like that immersive theater where you can like feel the rumbling of the action in your chairs, and like they move, and like wind, they make fans go, and like they immerse you in it. Our big technology in the 80s was smelling. Like, I mean, like for real. We had scratch and sniff stickers everywhere all the time of all the smells. Scratch and sniff books. Like, I specifically remember having a Sesame Street one, and there were a bunch of smells in it, but the two that really stuck out were the skunk, which was disgusting, and then the burning smoke, like to identify smoke, and they smelled so bad. But you know what? Every time we read it, I still scratched them. I still sniffed them, even though I knew it was going to be disgusting. I still did it. And then our toys smelled too, like Strawberry Shortcake and all of her friends. I can literally still smell them. Like, I just think of whatever kind, and like I can smell it. Like all of them. And then there was like Rose Petal. It's like Rose Petal Garden, and like I think her name was Rose Petal. And then there was Orchid and Daffodil. And they smelled like these flowers, but like not really how the flowers smell. Like definitely a very chemically artificial smell of these flowers. And it was, I mean, I loved it. But thinking about it now, I probably wouldn't, because they were probably pretty bad. And then like we had these other little toys. They were called charmkins, and they were like little tiny fairy baby things, and they were super small, and you could wear them on jewelry. And those also smelled like baby powder and flowers, kinda, I think. I don't know. It was just weird. It was a weird time, and we made things smell all over the place. Oh, pens. There was a bunch of pens and markers that would also smell. Like I had a purple pen that was also a bracelet, and it smelled like grapes, but also like ink. So it smelled really weird. Um, yeah. And then everyone wanted the smelly markers, and I don't know why, but I hated them. There was a couple of the smells that smelled good to me, but the rest of them, I don't know. It was like gross and weird, and like I could tell what people wanted them to smell like, but I smelled mostly chemicals, I don't know. It was bad, and I still have, like, smelling nightmares about them because ew. Ew, 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 ew. So it's weird because when we were kids, I feel like quicksand, the Bermuda Triangle, and being lit on fire, like the whole stop, drop, and roll thing, were like, wow, those could really happen. Those are like very plausible and likely things to go wrong in our lives. Like we're gonna be on a boat and we're gonna be in the Bermuda Triangle and we're gonna disappear. Why did we all worry about that? And quicksand, oh for the love of God, how many things like told us that we were gonna get taken down by quicksand. Like everything from Neverending Story to cartoons, Blazing Saddles, just like TV shows, just everything was just like, no, really, guys, you should worry about quicksand because the earth wants to swallow you up. And like, we were like, oh no, like, I've never seen quicksand. Have any of you guys seen quicksand? Have you ever like got stuck in quicksand? Because if you were a kid in the 80s, that was a legit like fear. Like I don't know, it's weird. Um but yeah, so the stop drop and roll thing, it is really good to like know what to do when you're on fire. And I feel like it's probably a smart thing to tell people, don't run cuz air makes fire bigger. So not good. And yeah, I think that like teaching people stop, drop, and roll. Super smart thing to do. Everyone should know how to do it or to do it, I guess. But the how to do it, I guess, is my thing because we actually had like segments in class in early elementary school. I remember like kindergarten and first grade, we would actually like practice. Like we'd all get up, we'd all line up, and there'd be mats on the floor, and we would stand at the mat on the mat and then we'd stop, we'd drop, and we'd roll. Like and then in a different grade, like I think that was kindergarten, and I think in first grade we actually like we went outside and we stopped, we dropped, and we rolled. And it was like part of the lesson plan. Again, great information. Everyone should know it, but it's just weird. Isn't that weird? Or is it just me? I think that's weird. Like, I don't know. I think that's weird.
The phrase stop, drop, and roll was legit not just school lessons, but there were like instructional posters in the office, at the nurses, sometimes in the classrooms or hallways, definitely in the janitor's closet for some reason, and commercials. Oh my goodness. There is some back and forth on who coined the phrase stop, drop, and roll. It's pretty much a toss up between the National Fire Protection Association, or the NFPA, or the Elisa Ann Roosh Burn Foundation. But I did find an article that accredited the NFPA with the concept as early as 1973 and it becoming an educational tool in 1974 with its Learn Not to Burn campaign in schools, as well as the infamous Dick Van Dyke commercial that was super popular in the late 70s and early 80s, where he had glittery fake flames on him and he stops, he drops, and rolls, and then he chuckles and says, "Roll, Dick, roll." And a dog shows up for some random weird reason. It's so bizarre. Like, all of it is just so bizarre. And the Elisa Ann Roosh Burn Foundation, whose founding history is based on the story of the Roosh kids in 1970, when one of them, in a freak barbecue accident, caught on fire and was saved by a sibling who knew about the technique. The foundation popularized the phrase with the development of a super simple graphic in 1979, which became part of the safety education curriculum widespread. And those graphics were a red stop sign, a yellow downwards pointing arrow, and a green circle with the corresponding words in each. I actually do remember also doing these coloring worksheets with those in the early grades of elementary school. Like, we'd have to color the stop sign red and the pointing arrow yellow and the circle green. Yeah. The Elisa Ann Roosh Byrne Foundation also had commercials or PSAs featuring things like Sparky the Clown. And although that absolutely sounds like a toss away character on a skit show like In Living Color or SNL, it was a real thing. And you can actually still find videos on YouTube of at least one or two of the Sparky the Clown commercials. There's also another PSA that the tagline, after just a simple, if you are on fire, stop, drop, and roll, was people burn too. What the fuck? Like I said, these fears were really pumped into us. We were like really kind of fear mongered into believing there was a high probability of us catching on fire or getting lost in the Bermuda Triangle or sinking in quicksand. The 70s, 80s, and 90s were such a wild time. Just wow. Like, such a cryptic vibe, I swear. Oh, yeah. And oddly or not oddly, I honestly don't know anymore, but stop, drop, and roll is no longer included in fire safety education as it's considered outdated, which, what? Yeah, I think the abundance of lessons, commercials, posters, and whatnot were a little excessive, but to call the actual technique outdated, what? I don't understand. What are they teaching if you do happen to catch on fire now? Like, what is the not outdated technique? Like, I don't know. And actually, that question led me to find an article on the site anchorsafetyinc.com that was published just last year in 2022 that says, unfortunately, the times are changing, and so is fire safety protocol. The well-known stop, drop, and roll method is not a feature of fire safety education anymore. The reason for this change is that these old fire safety teachings are now considered outdated. Instead of stop, drop, and roll, fire safety educators instruct children on more up-to-date methods of fire safety. This kind of protocol can change based on new trends and emerging information. While it can be confusing for parents and educators to keep up with new fire safety protocols, having the most up-to-date and current fire safety drills helps keep our kids safe. Also, our kids can teach us the new fire safety techniques they learn from their fire safety drills. um, huh? That didn't answer anything. Like, what? I'm so confused. I'm even more confused than before. And I feel like this isn't something that should be confusing or complicated. I, I just need to move on from this because if I keep on this subject, it's just going to make my brain itchy. So,
Another really crazy thing to think about are like traveling and like car trips or plane trips or even, on a bus or a train, whatever. If you were going somewhere, you didn't have a phone. There wasn't the internet to keep you entertained and for you to watch stuff. And there weren't, VCRs in the back of, and I say VCRs because we definitely didn't have DVD players. It would have had to be a VCR. We didn't have that stuff in the back of our cars and our vans and like whatever. That's not how we rolled. You went on a trip, whether it be on an airplane or, some kind of long distance car trip, you didn't have that stuff. You would like maybe bring a book or some comic books. If you were lucky, you had a Walkman or a Discman later on. If not, or you forgot them, then you didn't do anything. You just sat there and you listened to the music that hopefully your parents are playing that wasn't horrible, and you just kind of stared out the window. Like, ah, yes, tis outside going fast. And like, that's really all it was. Like, there wasn't, I don't know. Like, there really wasn't much. Yeah, there were like maybe some car games here and there, like the license plate game where you would look for, you know, each state, or a punch buggy game, um, an I Spy maybe, or 20 questions. Maybe, like literally maybe. And those were never long lasting. Like, that didn't take up too much time. Um, we definitely, my mom got us a couple little travel games with like little magnetic boards. They were small and they were adorable and I loved them. Um, but yeah, so trips and traveling, it was super, super, super different. Like, super different than it is now. Another awesome thing about growing up, especially in the 80s, were books with tapes, and not books on tapes, even though those were super cool too, and I definitely had my share of those. I mean books with tapes, or records, like the little tiny 45s also, but mostly in the 80s it was already cassette tapes. Um, but yeah, you would get a book and someone would read the book to you and you would follow along. And every time you needed to turn the page, a little chime or bell would go off. And it was just awesome. I remember I had all sorts of them and I loved them. I even had a Star Wars one and it had sound effects on it. And it was great. And I loved it so much. But if you've listened to this before, you know I have a weird connection with Star Wars. I was born in 1977 in May, which was the same month and year that it was released, and I was actually born on May 4th, which has turned into May the 4th be with you Star Wars Day. So I don't know. I feel some weird neuro spicy connection to it. And like, I loved that tape and that book. Like, oh, it was one of my favorites. But yeah, those books were so super cool, and it was so nice to be able to like have sounds and like um like sound effects and someone reading to you in just such a fun way. Books back then were different anyways. Like, I remember pop-up books were so big and they were so fun. And like, things would like, you'd pull a little tab and they'd pop up, or there would be little doors you could open, or like little texture areas, and just they were always like big and thick because there was just so much in them, and just, oh, they were great little spinny things. And just, I really, really, really miss pop-up books. Like, they were so much fun. There were all sorts of super fun, like weird books, activity books where it was just like mazes and word searches and like color in the pictures and like finish the drawings and just jokes in them and just all sorts of weird little games and just activities. They were super fun. And then we had the watercolor books that were super fun too, and they were just pictures. I remember specifically I had Barbie, and you would just, I mean, I had tons of them, like tons and tons of them, because that's just what we did. Um, but yeah, you'd get water and you would just paint with water in the picture, and each area had like its own color, and when the water would hit it, it would spread like watercolor paint. I don't know. It was just super cool. I loved them. There were also these ghost pen activity books that were super cool, and they were just like the normal activity books, but they came with this ghost pen, and it it didn't write on anything else. There was some kind of liquid in it. I don't know if it was just water or what, but you would have the answers or the maze or whatever, and you would find those or do the activity with this ghost pen that would only write in that paper on that paper. It was just, I don't know, they were super cool. We also had the sticker book, and I don't mean like the regular like collection sticker books. I mean like kind of like the watercolor books. Like it looked like a coloring book, but then there would be stickers that you would either have to like have perforated, they would have perforated edges and you'd have to like pull them gently out, or they'd, if they were fancy, they'd be like the adhesive ones, and you would have to stick them in certain areas. So, like, if it was a Barbie one, maybe her shoes would be a sticker, and so those would be pink, and then you'd color all the other stuff. Or maybe her purse and her tiara were stickers, or a dress, or a dog, or whatever. And those were super cool. Like, they were so fun. Except for the ones with the perforated edges, that weren't like the normal adhesive ones. They were like stamps, and like you'd have to lick them, and ugh, they were really gross, and they probably poisoned us a little bit along the way, but who knows. Another thing in the 80s and definitely the 90s, it seemed like everywhere, and I mean like restaurants, whether it be a sit down place or, a pizza place or a fast food place, or, not a restaurant like, or a food place, but like a store of any kind, everyone seemed to be giving, oh, even the movies, everyone seemed to be giving away novelty glasses, and like, like drinking glasses, and they would have that like enamel lead paint. I don't know if it was lead paint, but like, I'll say enamel. Like they would be clear glass, and then whatever character or scene would be in this like enamel like paint. And there was like Garfield and the Peanuts and the Smurfs, Care Bears, like, and anything that was cool or like kid oriented back then, it happened on a glass and someone was giving it to you, whether it be Pizza Hut or, Welch's Jelly or the bank or whatever. Everyone wanted you to have these glasses, and we loved them. Like, loved them. One of the more confusing trends and things that seemed pretty specific to being an 80s kid and maybe even a 90s kid were erasers. They would smell like things, they would be weird shapes, like all colors of the rainbow. And I mean, many rainbows, because we loved rainbows back in the 80s, like everything was rainbowed. But erasers, we had so many, and I mean like it would be impossible to name all of the different kinds of shapes and stuff, like ice creams and trucks and people and characters and just any kind of food you can think of, any kind of animal you can think of. They were all over the spectrum, from very detailed to not detailed at all. And the weird part is not that we liked them or we collected them so much. The biggest like oddity of the eraser collecting era was that most of the erasers were horrible erasers. Some of them didn't even erase at all, and some of them like completely ripped up your paper or just like spread the graphite all over the place and made it a complete mess. Like it was just, what a weird thing. Like, call them something else. Why are you calling them erasers if they're not erasers? If they're just like, you know, little trinkets, just say it's a little Smurf figure. You don't have to. Why call it an eraser if it's not gonna erase? It makes no sense. But yeah, going back to the rainbows, we literally had rainbow everything. I mean, shoes, belts, suspenders, barrettes, clothes, stickers, just anything and everything that could be a rainbow. The 80s was like, yes, rainbow it up, please. It was weird, but as a little girl in the 80s, it was freaking awesome. Another kind of weird obsession that the 80s had was Garfield. Now, don't get me wrong, I am a huge fan of Garfield. I had multiple of the books, like full comic books, and we used to watch the cartoon and all of the specials, like from the Halloween special that we had taped and my brother was obsessed with, to, Garfield and Friends, where we met Orson and the other barnyard freaks. Like I'm a big fan. Garfield was super cool. But it was kind of weird. Like the phone was everywhere, the Garfield phone, which I mean it was cool, I guess. But the biggest weird thing and the biggest obsession was this stuffy of Garfield that had little suction cups on his feet and people would stick them in their cars. And I'm saying like half of the cars that you saw driving around in the 80s had one of those somewhere in it. It was usually in a back window, and it was just like staring at you. And a whole bunch of them were just in the window for so long that they would fade from like the sun, and people would just drive around with those for like forever. And they were everywhere, and it was a lot. It was a lot of Garfield. I mean, again, I love Garfield. I had my own, thing with Garfield. But wow, like America, we were like, fuck yeah, Garfield, he's going in my car. Look how cool this is. Isn't this funny? It's a cat on the window. And I mean, it was, and it was cute for sure. But looking back, it's kind of funny and it's kind of weird. So, you know, I can't I can't remember the last time I saw one of those. I wonder if anyone still has those cuz now I kind of want one and I want to put it in my car. I want to put it in my car now. Of course, in the 80s, there was a lot of music that went huge and we were just obsessed with. I mean, of course, Madonna was gigantic. I was still in elementary school, like quite young, and I'm talking like, I don't know, maybe third, fourth grade, maybe, I don't know, between second and fourth grade, when Madonna was really like starting out and making controversy. And we would like wear the bows in our hair and the shirts off the shoulder and the bracelets all up and down our arms and the fingerless gloves, and we thought we were so awesome. I at one point lip synced for my family like a virgin, and it was on tape. I think it was lost, thank God. But I it was so embarrassing and so cringy, like literally like a virgin. And I had to be like, I don't know, 7-ish, I'm thinking. Like I had missing teeth and just, oh my God. And I'm just rolling around on the couch and like dancing it up and feeling it. I'm just feeling it. And like later on, it was super embarrassing because my dad especially thought it was really funny to show all of our family, like all the time, this video of me being such a little fucking loser and just so inappropriate. And I remember the grown-ups laughing and like me being embarrassed, after him showing it off a couple times and realizing that people weren't laughing with me and they were laughing at me. And I mean, I didn't get it then. Then I took it as, wow, I suck. Look at, they're laughing at me because I'm like dancing and like whatever. And I must just be horrible. But now, I mean, after I was an adult, I realized no, they were laughing because I was a little girl writhing on a freaking couch to like a virgin. Just, oh my God. So, yeah, Madonna was a big deal. And I mean, she continued to be a big deal for pretty much all of growing up. I mean, it wasn't until the last, I don't know, 10, 15, maybe 20 years, I don't know, that she's kind of become more of a cautionary tale, or I hate to say a joke, but just a lot, like a lot. But I mean, in the early years, she was huge and such a big influence. And I just, oh, but it makes me think of that and it's horrible. Like, oh God. And, Michael Jackson, of course, was huge. Like, there was no place that Michael Jackson wasn't. Like, his music was everywhere and everyone loved him. He was selling you Pepsi. He was dancing on the TV. He was playing on the radio, in the grocery store. It didn't matter. Everyone and their brother had the Thriller album, whether it was the record or on tape. Like, everyone loved it. I even remember when the video for Thriller came out and it was like a big debut and everyone like watched it at the same time because that's when it was on. And I don't know, it scared the bag out of me, honestly. Because I'm a little puss bag when it comes to horror stuff. And yeah, it scared me, but I loved it still. Especially because like Vincent Price was there and I knew who he was and I thought that that was kind of cool. But, there were things about him that were just super iconic. I mean, obviously the hairdo and then like the glittery um blazers that he would wear and the cuffed pants with the white socks and the loafers when he would moonwalk and like obviously the moonwalk and the red jacket that he wore. I think it was in no, I don't it wasn't bad. I can't remember, but the red jacket, um, and of course the glove, the one white glove that he would wear. And I remember I was super young. I remember we lived in a particular place, and I've moved a lot, so this is kind of how I gauge like time is where I lived. And I lived at this particular place from kindergarten to the end of second grade. So in that time frame, Michael Jackson was huge. Him and his glove were huge. And I wanted a glove so bad. And my mom, being my mom, who was awesome and crafty, um, she sewed me a glove. She sewed a sequin, like every single sequin on by hand on this white glove that she got. She did it at night after I went to bed. I didn't know she was doing it. And then one day she gave it to me. And it was just like, here, look what I made you. And I was like, oh, cool. I put it on for a couple minutes. And honestly, like, it felt weird because like the sequins and the thread on the inside, like the sequins weren't on the inside, but you could feel them through the glove, and then there was thread from sewing the sequins on in the middle and like on the inside. And it doesn't sound like a big deal, and it really wasn't, but it just wasn't comfortable for me. And now I know it's because I have sensory issues from being spicy. um like I still have sensory issues, especially like touch sensory issues. I hate seams, like seams of clothes and tags. Nothing in the world bothers me more than those. And if I'm home and with my family only, 90% of the time my clothes are inside out because I hate seams and tags so much. Like, but yeah, so now knowing that, like, I know that that's why it bothered me, but of course, I didn't know that then, and I was a kid, and I didn't appreciate it the way I should have, and I put it on, it felt weird, kept it on for a few minutes, and then I took it off and just kind of put it down. And I remember my mom being very upset, and she let me know that she was very upset about it, and that she had worked really hard on it, and that I was, not being very grateful that she spent all this time and this energy and put all this love into this gift that I wanted, and then I just kind of tossed it aside. And I seriously have felt bad about that forever, like forever. And I just, every time I think of Michael Jackson, that's really the main thing that comes up. Is like, oh, remember that time you were a real dick when you were a little kid and you didn't know you were being a dick, but you really like hurt your mom's feelings. Like, ugh. Or like anytime that something, I do something for someone and it goes unappreciated, or I think it went unappreciated, um, I think of that and I'm like, oh, that's what my mom must have felt like with the Michael Jackson glove. Hmm. Like I literally like now, like if people like I put effort or love or time and energy into something and they don't seem to understand that, like literally my head's like, oh, Michael Jackson glove. It's just so sad. It's so sad. And like, you know it is what it is. I guess I was kind of a little dick kid, but at the same time, I mean, I was a little kid and I don't know, you know it was what it was. It is what it is. And I hope my mom knows that I'm sorry. Another thing that's super different now than it was back then is ordering something. Now you order something and you are expecting that package in days. Like, I mean, sometimes like 2 days is not, quick enough. Um, the average, less than a week is like, oh my God, I have to wait how long to get something? Like you put an order in because you're doing it online, the whoever retailer is getting that order right away. And they're doing the whole process to get that package, ready and sent out to you as quickly as possible. Back in the day, that's not how it worked. You had to like you either had to call in if it was like some sort of place that you could even call in that would have, a customer service ordering center or whatever. And a lot of times you just had to fill out an order form and then mail it in. And then so you had to wait for your order to be mailed, to get there, to be processed, and then for the order to start. And most places would be like, oh, it's 4 to 6 weeks. And I mean like weeks and weeks and weeks. You would just sometimes that 4 to 6 weeks was early. Sometimes it was way, way longer, like couple months, and sometimes 3 months. Like it was a long time to get your stuff. Now we're like, we want it now. Oh my God, I ordered this 5 minutes ago. How come it's not here already? I'm gonna refresh my Amazon cart over and over and over and over and over again. How come it's not delivered? Like it's crazy. Especially because like a lot of us have grown up and did have to wait weeks and weeks for our mail order stuff. And it's just super crazy like how fast things change. Like I know 20, 30, 40 years doesn't seem like that long or doesn't seem fast, I guess. Um but it is. It is in the scope of a lifetime. It's a lot. Things have really, really changed.
Okay, that was a chaotic and random spew of thoughts and somehow also not so random. I don't know. I feel like that tracks with the era we're talking about. So, yeah. Um, it was seriously such a cool time to grow up and also such a weird time. And it makes me think of, that whole it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, but updated for the 80s and 90s. Like it was the coolest of times, it was the weirdest of times. So fitting. And although the time definitely had its major flaws and issues, I'm really glad I got to experience it and with the people that I did. There is definitely so much more we could have talked about and explored that were not even mentioned, and even more to say on everything that I did bring up. But I think this is a good start and a fun time, anyways, and I will absolutely be doing it again. So if you enjoyed this little random whirlwind of nostalgia, you know, come back and we'll do it again. And I don't know. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for joining me today for Naive in the 90s, the podcast. I hope you come back in 2 weeks for a new episode. Who knows what we'll do? So make sure to follow so you don't miss it. For questions, comments, feedback, or contributions to the conversation, send me a message at naiveinthe90s@gmail.com or connect with me on social media with the handle at naiveinthe90s. Find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and now Threads. Of course, don't forget to grab your copy of Naive in the 90s, the creative nonfiction book based on real-life diaries from the early and mid-90s. Follow along as a high schooler tries to navigate life, friends, relationship, and of course, the raddest era ever. And if you have read and enjoyed the book, please make sure to leave a review. Each and every one truly helps. Thanks again for joining. Hope to see you next time. Peace and love, my dudes.